Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Hugh Capital Podcast with yours truly, Jerlisa Juju Fontaine. So, I know you all have probably been thinking to yourself, Juju, it's Women's History Month, and you gave us like two episodes at the start of this new season with gentlemen. And I probably should have did it a little different. I apologize, but here we are. And guess what? We are still going to make sure that we highlight some amazing women who are making real impact throughout the month. So I'm sure you all enjoy those episodes anyway, but better late than never. The ladies are here, they're back, and they're going to be sharing their journeys with you all. So, with that being said, we're actually kicking it off with my personal friend, Aminata, aka Mimi. And as you can see, she's a very smiley person. Honestly speaking, if you're ever in the same room as us, you'll probably say, oh, they have like similar personalities. Like they're a lot, but in a good way. And you're going to see that throughout the course of this episode. But I just want to say that Mimi to me is a mixture of a couple of things. I feel like not only is she a cool person, someone you can speak to about different things, she's intelligent, she's informed, but she just has a very infectious spirit. Like she's someone that you just naturally feel like you have an affinity to. She's a very fun person to be around. She's very lively. She's a talker, but she's also a listener. And I felt like even though she has a great story to tell, just as a person, she's someone who just needed to be on this podcast. And interestingly enough, it's so funny how you have such amazing people in your network and you don't even realize on a day to day the type of impact that they have. Because I knew Mimi, but I didn't know that she worked on this extravagant campaign. Dum dum dum. And if you're wondering what campaign is this, well, last year, one of the most important topics in the news was about Brittney Griner. And for those of you who may not be familiar with who Brittney Griner is, let me give you some information. Brittney Griner is an American basketball player who is known for playing with the Phoenix Mercury. Her name became a trend on social media after she was jailed for 10 months after being caught carrying cannabis out at a Moscow airport in Russia during February of last year. Now, we're going to be speaking a ton about Mimi and her journey, but we're also going to be giving you all insight into what really helped Brittney Griner get freed. So, anyways, with that being said, Mimi, I can go ahead and do your whole entire intro for you, but let us know who you are, where you're from, what are you proud of? Who's Mimi?
Girl, what an intro. I'm over here
Come on.
like, oh my God, I'm so happy to be here speaking with you. As Juju mentioned, we really are very unhinged when we get together. It's like two people who don't know how to shut up, just come together and just talk. And it's like honestly one of my favorite things. But yes, hi everyone. My name is Mimi. I go by Aminata. I don't have a preference. I am a senior campaigner at change.org. And what else am I missing? I think
So
that's
then
what
what borough are you from? What's your
I'm from
city?
the
What's your
BX,
culture?
Bronx all day. We rep in the Bronx. I'm also Malian. I was born and raised in Mali. I came to the US when I was 10 years old. So I rep both, Mali, West Side, West African gang, but I also rep the BX. So not too much on us.
I love it. And that was a good intro. Once again, as you all can see, I mean, I gave a pretty solid one, so I was able to brag for her, but I think she did a good job too.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So the first thing I want to get at is, well, first things first, Mimi and I met through my best friend JR. So I have to give him a quick shout out. Yo, JR, you're the best. It's always great having quality people in your life who also attract you and introduce you to other amazing people who are now a part of your life. So really grateful for you, JR. I'm sure you're gonna hear this shout out at some point. Don't feel yourself too much, but feel yourself.
Mhm. And I actually met JR through a mutual friend, Fatu. So big shout out to my girl Fatu, who Juju also knows. Very
See,
small world, such a
the world
small.
is too small, but once again, it just shows that we keep good company.
Exactly.
Exactly. So before we get into the meat of this interview, everybody, the first thing I want to do is just kind of walk you all through Mimi's career journey because I think it's a very interesting one. And Mimi, please feel free to like chime in and let me know if I missed anything. But when I think about your journey, I think about you being student government president at your undergraduate university, you being an assistant program manager at New York Edge, you being a political communications advocate for Renewed Democracy Initiative, you also being a social media and community manager at Kind Snacks for the founder and former CEO of that company. And of course, now you are a senior campaigner for a very prominent tech company called change.org. And before you chime in and kind of give us more insight into like that career trajectory, I just want to highlight how interesting it is to watch that, because I feel like when I think about social change, social impact, you just think of nonprofit organizations. But the reality is that is not the only way to do powerful social impact work. There are actually for-profit organizations as well that do that type of work. So just kind of walk us through like what made you go from company to company? Like what inspired you to even be in this space?
That is a great question. So to start off, I'll start in college just a little bit. So in college, I had 3 majors, right? So I was a political science major, an international diplomacy major, and a French major. So through all 3 of those majors, through the course of my 4 years in college, and by the way, I went to Susquehanna University. I don't think we've said that yet.
Nope.
So in those 4 years, I was able to kind of dibble and dabble in so many different industries, essentially, right? So from working at the the EU, the European Union, while I was studying abroad, to living on a ranch in Montana for 3 months. Right, girl, I done did it all.
Okay.
And I think through all of those experiences, I always found myself learning something new about myself. So after I graduated from college, I graduated in my head thinking, okay, clearly you need to do something in politics, which is not wrong per se, but I didn't realize at the time that I didn't have to stay in that box, which is something I feel like a lot of college students, no one really tells you that, right? Like you graduate as a marketing major and, you're like, okay, I have to be in marketing or look for marketing internships. That's not true. So for anyone listening to this, no matter what your degree is, try new things, go after what you want. You never know. So for me, working at RDI, which is Renewed Democracy Initiative, it was a nonprofit organization founded by Garry Kasparov, who is like one of the best chess players in the world. He's a Russian chess grandmaster. And for him, and I learned a lot from working there, right? So this person, he's known internationally as being one of the most accomplished chess players, but at the same time, he was very passionate about he was very passionate about things like, protecting the democracy and things like that. So he created this nonprofit to protect American civil liberties. And, from there, I, like you mentioned, jumped to being a social media manager. But even then, working for Daniel Lubetzky, he was also someone who cared a lot about social change. And he had a lot of organizations that I was able to support as his social media manager, and eventually found myself into a tech company. So although I was jumping from industry to industry, from nonprofit to for-profit to, whatever you want to call it, in the end, I was still working in social change in some capacity. And I think that's what's so exciting about this. So in every single new job or opportunity I had, all of my skills were transferable. And that's the key word, transferable skills. You don't have to stay in one industry. However, whatever job you're at now, ask yourself, okay, what skills can I develop here? What can I ask my managers to let me lead? That's going to help me build up the right skills to go to the next space and, do something even better.
I honestly love that. I'm so impressed by that. That was a phenomenal answer.
Mhm.
And I smiled when you mentioned the name of the founder for Kind Snacks, because I remember you kind of like speaking to me about a very interesting fact about him in terms of like where he's from and something else. Talk
Yeah.
to me about that.
Yes. So Daniel Lubetzky is, I think I was telling you about his ethnic background.
Mm-hmm.
So he describes himself as a Mexican Jew. And so a lot of people, they think, what? A Mexican and a Jewish what? So Daniel, a big part of his life story and a big part of why he does the work he does is because of his father. So his father was a Holocaust survivor. And after the Holocaust, his father and their family moved to Mexico, like many other Jewish people. I think the community is probably about like 30,000 people today. I'm not sure. You don't quote me on that.
Mhm.
But essentially, there's a small community of Jewish people who live in Mexico and have lived there for decades. Daniel's family is a part of that community. So Daniel was born and raised in Mexico amongst his siblings, and his family moved to the US when he was about 16 years old. So for him, he brings a lot into, I guess, the work that he does, from being someone who comes from a group of people who were, who faced a genocide essentially, to now, living in Mexico and then coming to America as an immigrant and, building his way to creating a multi-billion-dollar company. Like, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, I had to make sure you shared that because I thought that was a pretty interesting like history lesson there, just about there being like Mexican Jews and there being
like no one ever tells
people like that. Like I've never heard of that, so that definitely caught me off guard. I was like, she needs to share that. But another reason why I asked that question was because I think it's so impressive that you've had the opportunity to once again go from politics to nonprofit work to social impact technology work, and ultimately you have the opportunity to work with very prominent figures throughout your very short career so far. So I can only imagine what's going to happen next over the course of the next 10, 20, etc. years, right? You're working with a politician. You worked with the founder of a multi-billion-dollar company that, to your point, also got sold to an even larger conglomerate called Mars or Mar. And then, fortunately for you, what we're going to talk about now is you've had the chance to really change someone's life. Something happened to Brittney that I'm sure she would never in a million years have thought would happen to her, but it did. And you were a part of a team that honestly, I might be, I don't know if it's the right word to say, but to an extent, like you all saved her. I mean, I'm not sure how abrupt somebody else wants to say it or not, but for me and my understanding of this, you saved her. So I want to speak with you about, with you being a campaigner at change.org. What made you feel like this was even an initiative to pick up?
Yeah, so we actually just came up on the 1-year anniversary of the world finding out that Brittney was incarcerated. So as you mentioned in the beginning, I believe February 17th was the date that she was arrested. The rest of the world did not learn of her arrest till March 5th. So I remember March 5th like the back of my hands. It was, I believe it was a Saturday. It was a day I was not supposed to be working, and which is even crazier, right? So the New York Times article comes out detailing everything, saying Brittney Griner has been arrested in Russia for XYZ reasons. That's how the whole world found out. And, for me, knowing what I know about my job and our platform, I knew that someone was going to create a petition. It was just a matter of time of when, right? Usually when, breaking news happen like this, someone, and thank God for, these people who feel so passionate about certain stories that they come to us and they said, hey, I'm going to create a petition. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what the petition can do. And, we hear all the jokes. I myself see the jokes on Twitter all the time. It's like, what are you going to do? Create a petition? Ha ha. Like nothing's going to come out of it. And before I started working here, I used to crack up at those jokes. I still kind of do because it is
love the honesty. Love the honesty.
It's like, yeah, what are like a petition? But what the public doesn't know is that there's a group of people like me behind the scene behind these petitions. So, to the public, it's like a petition. But behind the scenes, you have campaigners who are experts in what we do, right? We have media professionals, we have email professionals, we have people on the grounds just doing the work. I always say like we're the invisible force behind so many movements. And I think that that's so cool because at the end of the day, it's not about me or my coworkers, it's about the work that we're doing. So I knew someone was going to create a petition. So I kept checking our Salesforce. So we use Salesforce all of our stuff. I kept checking our Salesforce the whole day. I'm just like, I'm waiting. I'm searching the keyword Brittney Griner, Russia. Where is it? And I found it. The petition had like 5 signatures at the time. Like the person had just created it and I found it. So I went on Slack and I saw that one of my coworkers was also online, Calvin. Shout out to Calvin. And hey, Calvin, I was like, Calvin, okay, blah, 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 blah. Here's what's going on. Here's a breaking news. And he's like, oh my God, like I've been following the story too. Insane. So again, we're not supposed to be working and I don't advocate this, but this is when, riding the wave, like it's so I always tell people campaigning is one of those things where like timing is crucial, right?
Yes.
So this was the day everyone is talking about it. This is like, the outrage is there, the shock is there. So for us, I could have easily waited till Monday to start working on this campaign, or I can start planting the seeds now so that by Monday, the campaign is kind of working itself out. So I reached out to the starter. The starter, her name is Tamron Spurl, and Tamron is actually a sports journalist and an award-winning author. Amazing, right? She knows what she's doing, and also within like sports journalism, her focus is women's basketball. So she's not new to this. She knows who Brittney is. She knows the industry. I couldn't ask for a better person to start this petition because she was an expert in the field, and the petition was expertly written, and she did everything she could. I messaged her, introduced myself, and said, "Hey, this is who I am. Here's what I do. Here's how I'm going to help you," essentially. So from there, we were able to send out press notes. So we basically pitched the petition to journalists. So that was all Calvin. Calvin wrote up a press release about the petition and about Tamron. We sent it to so many different journalists, hundreds of journalists. I was able to get the petition in our email base to send it to thousands and thousands of subscribers before they can even wake up the next day. And we just did I can't even remember how much, but we did so much work in just those few hours that by the time we came in on Monday, all we had to do was just give our team an update. But that was basically the start of how we found this petition. And to answer the other part of your question, the reason why I thought this would be something that I should work on. I actually knew of Brittney Griner way before this. So as many of my older friends will tell you, or friends from like middle school and high school, I was a basketball player.
Every athlete heard that.
Back in the days, a lot of people used to call me Mimi James.
I love it.
You couldn't tell me I was not LeBron's daughter. Like, I really thought I was the next LeBron. But so, and back in the days when I used to play ball, Brittney Griner was one of the players, and because she was in college when I was in high school. So she was at Baylor University, and I did not miss a single one of her games, especially when she was playing Notre Dame, and Skylar Diggins, another one, was on Notre Dame. Anyway, I was a huge fan of hers because we play the same position. So she's a center, I'm a center. I'm 5'11". For those who don't know, I'm pretty tall. So I would watch her moves, learn her moves, practice her moves on the court. She became someone who I almost idolized because she was playing the same position I did, and she was really good at her job. So I was always a big fan. So when I saw this, it was kind of like, okay, this person indirectly helped me so much as a player. How can I give back even in the slightest way? So and also too, being a Black woman in a different country, and not to mention the fact that she's a queer Black woman, and all of the isms comes into play here. So for me, I'm like, okay, we have the resources to help her. I want to be the one to lead this fight because I can relate to her on so many levels.
I love that. I love how you highlighted the intersectionality of who she is and what she represents as that being one of the main factors that you wanted to drive this, right? You realize, once again, she is a Black woman, she is queer. These are underrepresented groups, no matter what country that you're talking about, right? And I think that it's very meaningful to know that you felt like this was someone that I needed to back. Especially also because I think that while most people are fans of celebrities, athletes, artists, etc., sometimes they do get a lot of like negative energy, like, oh, well, you're already rich, you don't need anybody, or you already have everything, you don't need anyone's help. And you were not that kind of person. You realize that this is somebody who indirectly has inspired you to be your best at something that you cared about. And although maybe you were not playing basketball at the time while you're working at change.org, you still remember how it made you feel. And you realize that if this person made me feel powerful at something that I cared about, and this person is in a position where they can't really help themselves, they need a community of people to help them, to save them, I want to lead that. I want to give that back. And I love that answer. That was really powerful.
Yeah, thank
You're
you.
so great. You know that though.
No, girl, stop. But no, yeah, and I think a big part of why, and also to mention Tamron Spurl, the petition starter, she herself is also a queer Black woman, right? So it's kind of like, I remember when I posted about the victory back in December, someone on Instagram DM'd me and said, leave it to Black women to save Black women. And I thought, oh my gosh, that's literally what happened here.
That's exactly what it is.
Unfortunately, it shouldn't have to take that, but it was just like, yeah, when I look back on it, it was Black women and Black people and Black organizations who came together to fight for her so relentlessly. And at the time when the news was announced, obviously her family and her team knew that she was arrested for a while, and they had a different plan of action. They wanted to remain silent. And for us, we saw it seemed like no one had her back almost. Not, we're not talking about her family or team, but
Yeah.
nationally, when you look in the news, it's like, okay, why is no one talking about this? And this petition became the one singular thing that we saw continuously week after week. Like, okay, here's an update. Here's actions that were taken to help make this to basically keep the story alive, right?
Right.
And we can talk about this later, but we had so many competing headlines. When I tell you, Juju, last year was a mess. Like, abortion, like Roe v. Wade, student loans, gas prices, Ukraine. At every little thing you can remember that happened in 2022, it was basically, I'm like, okay, how can we bring this story to the top? Like, this is important, but also how can we make sure that Brittney's story doesn't get lost in all of these insane things? It was hard, but
you did it, right? And something that I want to touch on a little bit more that you also mentioned is this word team, the word community, right? The reality is, although you are the one who identified the opportunity to push this campaign forward, you can't do that by yourself. So what I want you to do is give us a breakdown of what you did already, but just elaborate a little bit more on who did you work with at change.org, not name wise, but like title wise, position wise, to bring this campaign to life. And who did you work with on, let's say, Brittney's team? Like what titles, what roles were a part of her team that helped you do what you needed to do?
Yeah, I think that's an amazing question. I would say for change.org, we have the full support of the entire company.
Nice.
Change is an international company. We have offices all across the world, but our two headquarters are in New York City and in San Francisco. So being that I live in New York City, I go to the New York office pretty frequently, and a lot of our C team members are in New York, right? So for example, our CEO literally lives in Brooklyn. And every time I go to the office, I'm just like, Nick, let me tell you what's happening with this petition. And we're just like going back and forth, just like, he's just like, wow, this is insane. And so everyone from my particular team, the campaigns team, so we're known as the US Deep Support. Shout out to the OGs, y'all know who y'all are. So the campaigners were on board. Our media team was on board, our email team, even the engineers, right? Like we ran into a few moments where we were facing some trolls on the petition, leaving insane comments, the engineers and the privacy team, like so many different teams. And I think that's the cool part about this being a tech company is that majority of the people who actually work for us are not campaigners. They're people who are the actual tech people, right? And they're amazing at their job. They know what they're doing. So I felt very confident knowing that at any point, like if there was something that needed to be done, even if I didn't have the capacity, I was able to delegate to someone who I knew was equally, if not more qualified to take it and run with very little supervision. So that was amazing. On Brittney's team particularly, we worked with the Wasserman group. So Wasserman is essentially like the talent agency that she signed to. So which meant that her actual agent, we worked with her a lot. Like we had meetings with her all the time. Her wife was also a part of this group. So and who else? Basically, think of anyone who would be on her team we had connections to and like was working with directly. And that's the other part about this too. This was not just us doing whatever we want lollygagging. Like we meeting with her team, her family, all of these people who represented her on a pretty like consistent basis. And we're like, okay, here's the projects we're running, here's what we're doing, and here's how you can help us, delegate or make this happen. And so it really was a team effort on all fronts. And we're really happy that even though, in the beginning, they didn't want the publicity of the petition, like they were just like, okay, we want to keep a quiet profile. But when they finally came around, like, in May, they came back to us and said, hey, we want to get on board. We were ready to hit the ground running.
What were the numbers? Because you mentioned that when you first picked it up, it was 5. Where did it land at the end?
So at the very, very end, let's actually go look.
Let's look it up. Let's do it.
I think it's over 400,000 actually. Griner.
Wow.
No, it literally is like almost 500,000. So when the petition closed in December, it had 405,931 signatures when it was a victory. So almost 500,000 people signed this petition.
I wish I had a flower to give you right now.
Girl,
Here's your imaginary flower.
I love it.
Like, you and your team did that. And sorry to cut you off here, but for everybody who's listening, I want you to really like think deep about what Mimi just mentioned, right? When I think about everything she just said, I think about 2 words. I think about collaboration and community. I asked that question because I want to remind people that when you are working on something that is supposed to change the outcome of someone's life, it's not just a matter of you working alone or you just working with your internal team at your company. To Mimi's point, you are working with that person's family. You are working with that person's professional colleagues as well. Like, it doesn't just stop with you working with people that you work with on a day to day. You really have to get comfortable with interacting with people who are outside of that work setting, because that's what true collaboration looks like when you're trying to make like real impact. So that's
You
the reason why I asked that question.
No, you just reminded me of a really quick story I want to tell that
No,
I
share
think
it, please.
your listener would love, about collaboration and community, but also being nimble and being resourceful. I
Hmm.
always say you have to be someone who's willing to work like with the least amount of resources. You have to be scrappy, right? And that's
Yeah.
something, again, I feel like us New Yorkers, like
Oh, we do that.
you know
Oh, we
we
make the best out of
okay.
anything. How do we do it? I don't know,
We
but
don't
we
know.
do
Nobody know. Nobody will
it.
know. But a perfect example is that at I think around like June, July of our work with this, and by this like people were already like tired, like, oh my gosh, she's still there. What? She's never coming back. And so people were kind of starting to lose hope. And for us, our biggest goal at the time, and this was the goal throughout the entire project actually, was to get the White House's attention. And we
Hmm.
knew they knew what was going on, but it was to like literally like be on their ass, for lack of better words, right?
Yep.
And so for me, I remember sitting there and I'm just like, oh my gosh, like, how are we gonna get to Biden?
Hmm.
Right? Like, think about it. Just me, a little girl from the Bronx, like, how am I gonna get to Biden? Right? Like, how do you contact the president of America? And obviously, like, there were like, there's ways you can contact the White House, but there's no guarantee that like they're actually gonna hear you. So I thought, okay, I started thinking backwards. I'm like, how can I get the White House's attention? And I was like, who is already in the White House that I can get their attention and basically make them a messenger? I thought,
Hmm.
the press correspondence. There's about 60 to 100 journalists who are in the White House every single day, and it's televised, like, right, like they're asking the press secretary questions, like literally pressing them every day. It's their job to ask these questions. So I thought, okay, I may not be able to get to Biden myself, I can't just go knock on his door, but if I can get through every single one of these, like, press correspondents and get them to ask my question at their next press conference, at least we will know that there's a televised record of, the White House answering this question. And it worked. So I sent an email to I found every single one of their emails, right? People from CNN, MSNBC, anybody who's a a White House correspondent, I emailed them. It's like, hey, here's a lowdown. Here's who I am. In your next press conference, can you please ask the press secretary this question? Like, I literally wrote the question out for them.
Mm.
All they had to do was read my question, and it worked. So and because I emailed all of them, when the first person asked the question, the conversation just took off. The rest of them were just like on their ass, right?
Yep.
And so, and because they had all received the email, they didn't know that, but they were like, the conversation literally went on for like 5 minutes, which like, to people who are not familiar with that process, 5 minutes is a very long time on
It
one
is.
question with the press secretary. And the follow-ups were amazing. So they just kept asking her, okay,
Yes.
specifics about like Brittney's condition, how, what works are being done that can be shared publicly, what's happening, to basically put pressure on the White House. And I was just sitting there watching the video like, we
I
did
did that.
we did it, Joe. We did
We
it.
did it.
And then from there, we did a bunch of other things. So eventually Biden actually made a statement on the petition on our platform. So if you go to the petition, it will tell you like, oh, there's one decision maker response. And you'll go and see it's literally President Biden making a comment about the petition and Brittney's case. And that had never been done before. Like, no other change.org positions had like a US sitting president comment on it. And so that was a big deal. And that also came along
Huge.
with like an actual press release from the White House about Brittney. Instagram posts, they basically went, super public about their support and like, their commitment to getting her back. And for us, that was the green light to just keep going. So
Keep going.
yeah,
Honestly,
so
I'm
be
so happy
scrappy.
I'm
Be
so happy you started with that story, because I remember when Mimi was first telling me about this, we were at like one of my game nights. Because if you know anything about me, we have a great
okay.
time at my game nights. But here Mimi and I are in the corner, ignoring all the chaos
Everybody just
around
like
us,
screaming
talking
at each
about
other.
Brittney Griner and this campaign. And I remember when she first told me about this story, I was like, wow, like this woman really took something. How do I say this? You took you took, to your point, you had limited resources. You know what you have access to, you know what you don't have access to. And you realize, okay, if I am going to make a big deal out of this, I'm going to have to work with what I got. And you know what? You worked with an email address and you worked with that powerful brain of yours in order to bring light to Joe Biden of this situation. And
Yeah.
what I want you to do for us next is, although that is one of the most significant stories that you have in this journey, also share with everybody, what else did you all do to make this campaign successful? Because you did a lot.
What do we not do is the
That.
question. So overarchingly, my idea and my game plan for tackling this, because so the one thing about this campaign and every other campaign that we touch on at change.org is that we're not God. We don't know what the end game looks like. We don't know when the end game is going to be. So when I picked up this campaign and when my team started working on it, we literally did not know how long we're going to be working on this. Like I remember our team in the UK had a campaign almost similar. It was like a woman who was arrested in Iran, and that campaign went on for like 7 years. Like it literally wasn't until like last year that that woman was freed after 7 years. So for us, it was like, okay, we're bracing ourselves for the long haul, right? And the key word here is sustainability. How do we run an effective campaign in a way that we don't burn out? Like how can we do it in a way that it's both impactful but also both sustainable, so that no matter at what stage we're at, we're going to keep applying pressure and keep going. And so for me, one of my biggest ideas was, okay, let's just take every single thing that's happening in the world and in America and make it about Brittney. It literally sounds so unhinged, but that was the game plan. That was the game plan, right? And I remember, so I will basically tell you a little bit about some of these bit points. I made a timeline from March to like December, essentially, being that, okay, the fiscal year is going to end, but here's all the dates that we should be aware of and how we can make it about Brittney. And those included the dates of the BET Awards, right? The day of the ESPYs Award, the NCAA playoffs, the NBA playoffs, the WNBA playoffs, even national holidays like the 4th of July or whatever. So I'll tell you about what we did at some of these points. So we'll start with the 4th of July, right? So America's Independence Day is all about that independence, freedom. So how can we talk about freedom when one of our own is literally in Russia with, arrested in God knows what conditions? She isn't free, right? And also something that was really incredible about her story as well is that her father was a Vietnam veteran. So we made Veterans Day about her as well. I'm sorry, Memorial Day, not Veterans Day, Memorial Day about her and her family, because her father is someone who put his life on the line for this country. And so for the 4th of July, we knew that. So I was like, okay, every single person who is anyone in politics is going to be in Washington, D.C. on the 4th of July. It happens every year. They all go to D.C. for whatever celebrations. We knew that Biden was going to be in D.C., right? And so we wanted to basically bring this campaign to their face. So we paid for a week-long billboard at the Capital One Arena. I don't even know. So for the New Yorkers who are listening, the Capital One Arena is basically like the DC version of Madison Square Garden. So imagine if we had taken a whole digital billboard, like a 360 billboard of Madison Square Garden, and plastered Brittney's face all over it. But it was very simple. It was a very simple campaign. It had Brittney's face, and it had, we are BG, and I think it switched with other words like, Free Brittney or something like that. But the center of the billboard was a QR code to the petition.
Wow, that's smart. That's clever.
You can be in traffic like 100 feet away from that billboard and just go, what is it? Like, what is this QR code? Oh, it's a petition. Oh, let me sign it real quick. So that was up there for a week, right? And, there were like a lot of logistical things behind that. It took so many people to make that happen. Like we had to get licensing for her pictures and like work out stuff with the, arena, all that stuff. But essentially, the Capital One Arena is located centrally in DC. So anyone who's in DC that weekend has to go through that, that street to get to the White House, to get to anywhere they have to go. So it was brilliant. So we knew there were going to be stuff there. We also paid for ads in both national newspapers and local newspapers. Because one thing we knew about Biden is that, Biden's from Delaware. He still reads his local paper. So we placed ads in that too. No one's reading that Delaware paper, but
he is. He is.
And so yeah, so that's something that we did. And then for the ESPYs award specifically, as we know, Brittney has received the ESPYs in the past. I think she has a few ESPYs awards actually. We were able to work with her team and different like people who were involved with the show, different athletes, to have a whole segment dedicated to her, which was amazing. And then so part of what my team did to add to all of those efforts was we decided to, again, the billboards worked amazingly the first time. Let's do it again, but this time let's bring the billboard to the people. So the took place in LA, like right in Hollywood. And so, there was a lot of like restrictions about like where you can place a billboard or how close you can get to the award ceremony. So we hired a mobile billboard company. We got 3 mobile billboards to drive around all over LA for the entire day with, again, we have the QR codes and it's like 3-sided. You have QR codes, you have her pictures, you have words. You basically, if you were in LA that weekend and in the Hollywood or downtown area, you saw those vans at some point. And so that also created like a huge moment for people to just be like, oh my God, yeah, like Brittney isn't here, right? So again, bring to the people who are there. And we did a bunch of other similar things. We were able to talk to her team about some of our ideas, and they helped us a lot with execution. Anyone who watched the NBA playoffs last year with the Celtics and the Warriors, you might have remembered that one game where the entire Celtics team had on a "We Are BG" t-shirt with a QR code on the back. This is a televised national playoff game. And that day, literally all of the reporters are like, what is this shirt you guys are wearing? Even if you go on Google and you type it in, like the keywords, like, QR code, Celtics playoff or whatever, even in the Google images, you can scan the code and it will take you to the petition. It was that visible. So basically, again, we took every little moment we could and made it about Brittney. And in the end, it helped us stay relevant and it helped us remind people like, yes, this is still an issue and it's still ongoing. That was a good answer.
First of all, that was a phenomenal answer. And like I said, it's so cool because I feel like some of those things I recall us speaking about, and then some of them were new.
Yeah.
And all in all, for everybody who's listening, I think what's very powerful about this story is a lot of us think that if you do not have the physical power to change something, it's not worth fighting for. As in, if you are not in a position to be a decision maker, it's no worth fighting for. And I think what you and your team realized is, okay, listen, we are not the ones in a position to literally get Brittney Griner back to the US from Russia. We cannot physically do that. That is not within our bandwidth, our legality, our job description. We don't have that power. But what we do have the power to do is we have the power and resources to bring life to the concerns of our community members, whether that be locally, regionally, nationally, etc. And in this case, it was a person who started a petition about Brittney Griner. And you all realize that what we can do is we can pinpoint who needs to know about this. Who is the person in this country that has the power to get her to come back home? Joe Biden. Yeah. So if that's the case, yeah, we need the signatures from just everybody, no matter where they are. But the real truth is, while we are getting those signatures and we are drawing in that attention from everybody who's listening, we need to make sure it ends up in the hands of Joe Biden and not just end up in his hands, but he needs to see how important this is for him to solve because we have so much support from the community that we brought this petition to. And I feel like that is the biggest learning lesson of this entire story is realizing even if I am not in a position to make a final decision on something, I'm going to still find a way to give that message power with what I have.
And that's so beautifully. Oh my gosh.
I should be this person for this. Maybe, listen, I should be on the stage like, listen.
You were built for this.
I have to change that org. Here's what they did.
No, literally, even for as simple as the people who put their names on the petition to people who retweeted the petition to the people who commented, it seemed like such small lift, but I honestly feel like this is one of the best examples of showing people that there is power in numbers and collective action was the key to winning this, right? No, again, unless you were someone who was in basketball, you probably did not know who Brittney Griner was, but today you cannot ask a random person on the street, be like, do you know Brittney Griner? And they're like, who's that?
They know who that is.
They most likely know who she is, and it's because this story was blown out of proportion, as we should have,
As
right?
it should have. Mm-hmm.
As we should have. And I think it's, again, a great example of people coming together and doing the best that they can, even if that best was just clicking a retweet button. So yeah.
I love that. Honestly, Mimi, I'm so grateful that you even like gave me the opportunity to interview you about this.
Get out of
When
here.
I first heard about it, I was so impressed. I just love the
Oh, that's
story.
so
I
sweet.
can't believe that, you were the person leading all of this.
Girl, you and me both. Do you know how many
Like,
times?
I
Okay,
was shocked. I was like,
no,
what? Like, my friend,
you
like someone
and
that I know
me
did this?
both. Juju, I swear, and again, this might be great for your listeners. The amount of times I would just take a pause, like in those 10 months, and be like, they're really letting me be in charge of this?
Right. Like, literally, like, you're
Is
like,
it in your
that's
head?
amazing.
I'm just a kid. Like literally, I'm like, I graduated college like a few years ago. And I'm like, y'all sure? Like I'll be in a
Mm-hmm.
meeting, like, okay, guys, this is the idea I want to run, and here's all the reasons why I think this idea is gonna work. Let's just try it. And my managers are like, whatever you say, Mimi. And I'm like, yeah, sure.
No,
Like
honestly.
no pushback. And I think for that, that's like a really something that I'm so glad I got to experience and learn, is that you're literally never too young, you're never inexperienced
Never.
enough. And it's like, I would say, yeah, like I literally at every step of the way, I was just like, yeah, y'all want me to do it? Like, and also I had to do like press interviews as well. Like
Mm-hmm.
I'll just wake up and I'll get an email from our media team, and they're like, hey, this company or this media company platform wants to interview you. Can you get on a call really quick, or can you get on this
Mm-hmm.
TV? And I'm like, girl, y'all want me in front of the TV? Like what?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
through
You
all
did
of
it.
it, I would say, don't ever doubt yourself. You
Yeah.
are that girl, and there's a reason why you are where you are. Something I want to share really quickly, since your listeners are Black women or predominantly women of color. I know a lot of times many of us struggle with imposter syndrome, but one thing that kind of keeps me going is ask yourself, will these companies hire a Black woman or a woman of color if she wasn't qualified? Like, let's really ask ourselves that.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of so anytime you feel like you're doubting yourself, you're like, oh my God, I don't have the skills to do this, I'm not equipped to do this. Ask yourself if you being hired was a mistake. It most likely wasn't. These companies
That's
are not
right.
going to throw hundreds, tens of thousands of dollars behind you and
Mm-hmm.
investing in you if you were now more than qualified to do your job. Imposter syndrome is not something that I feel like we should worry about. I know it's hard
No.
because it's kind of a battle between you versus
Mm-hmm.
yourself in your head, but it's like, remember, at the end of the day, you are not a straight white man. You're not about to just get hired just because you showed up. You have to show the receipts, and there's
Exactly.
a reason why you're there. So keep that in mind. Anytime you feel like me, yes,
No, I
sis,
love
you,
that. And,
you,
and one more thing to highlight too before we go, I
yes.
have two more questions for you. But I feel like to your point, right? You were so shocked that they took this bet on someone who was so young to lead this campaign. But what I think about is the fact that you possess something very important. You possess leadership skills.
Mm.
And I'm thinking back to your career trajectory. You were a student government president.
Girl, me and
And
you both
we,
heard.
we both were. Hello, you get me? And I'm just curious. I mean, I always have an answer to this, but I'm curious
Yes.
your answer to this. How do you feel? What do you think you you learned from being a student leader that kind of helped guide you doing this campaign?
Girl, when it comes to colleges in general, I always say college is a microcosm of the world, right?
Yes.
Whatever you're experiencing on your college campus, just know it's just a smaller version of what's happening globally.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, whenever I think about SGA presidents, it's like you're a president of a mini country. Because think about it, right? Like the schools we go to, these are the sizes of a lot of small countries around the world. Like
Mm-hmm.
hundreds of thousands of students in some of these schools, even though my school was pretty small. One thing that I also want to preface that makes my experience slightly more unique than a lot of other SGA presidents, unfortunately, is that I went to a predominantly white school in a predominantly conservative town, a very conservative white working class town. And when I was elected, I was the first Black president in my school's history, right? There had never been a Black president before me, and like the Black student population in general at the time was 4% Black. So think about it: you're in a school where only 4% of the student body is Black. And so it was, and also this is the time of Trump, the Trump era. I was elected in 2018 to 2019. So a very interesting time in American politics. And for me, when I became president, my election actually became a very controversial topic
Mm-hmm.
in the area, because there were a lot of white supremacists who thought it was their job to keep the school white, even though it was a private school. They started threatening me. every way that they can, on social media, trying to find me in person. In every way, shape, or form, they put my life in danger because to them, a Black president at this university is insane. And for me, again, this is where being a Bronx girly comes into play. In my head, even though this is a very serious situation, right? Like, and mind you, the group, they were known as the 3%ers. The 3%ers were a critical part of the January 6th insurrection at the Capitol. Like, the same people who climbed the walls at the Capitol were the same people who were like, you need to go. So again, in my head, I'm just like, listen, I'm from the Bronx, you can't scare me. Even though I was a little scared, just a little
You also know literally.
a little bit, but I'm just like, I'm gonna give you even more reasons to hate me, right? By doing excellent like work for this community, on this campus, for these people. So to answer your question, I would say one of the biggest things I learned, honestly, is learning to work with people who have such different views and different backgrounds. Like, how can I communicate clearly to people who don't speak the same language as me? And I'm not meaning language literally, right? I'm talking to people whose life experiences are so different than mine. Like, I'm talking to people who are from like millionaire families, or people who are coming from towns where there wasn't a single Black person, people who literally like look at me and they're like, you are a Black Muslim immigrant person, you don't belong here. And I'm just like, okay, at the end of the day, what are we really talking about here, right? So for me, I think all my experiences working with such people, these Republicans and conservatives and all these people, was that I learned how to get my point across and how to work effectively in a way where our differences was not a bottleneck to the work that we're doing. And that comes in handy every single day at every single job I've had up until this point, where, you're not always going to be in a room where everyone agrees with you, or where everyone looks the same, or everyone, like, if I say, Juju, like, can you look at my edges or something? Like, like people who might not get even the littlest, like, you're not always going to be surrounded by Black women or other women like you. So how can you lead effectively and lead such a diverse group of people? And for me, I think that was my biggest takeaway, because I was basically leading a university where I was the outlier, right? I didn't look like everyone. I didn't sound like everyone. I came from a completely different place. But at the end of the day, it did not affect my leadership skill. If anything, it made me a better leader. So
that was a phenomenal answer. And I feel like anybody who's a student right now who's listening to this, they probably feel like, damn, should I start thinking about my campaign?
Yes, girl, you better put your name on that list.
Listen, Mimi spoke it into existence for you, okay? If you are pondering on the thought and you're not quite sure, this is your moment to kind of make that a real decision. Just go for it.
Yeah.
You never know. It will maybe one day prepare you to be a senior campaigner at
Change.org.
Boom.
Or create your own change.org.
That part. But Mimi, honestly, thank you so much. I feel like you were able to thoroughly answer all of these questions. Before I let you go, though, there's one final question I have to ask. Are you ready?
Yes.
Awesome. I ask everybody a similar question, but for you, it'll look a little different. The question is, what does the future of social impact technology look like? Boom.
Great question. The future of social impact in a world where technology is becoming, so prevalent, is that intersectionality is going to be the key, right? In every shape, in every step of the way, you're going to need people who bring in different experiences, whether it's lived, whether it's learned. You're going to need people who are going to be advocates, whether you agree with them or not. Quick example: you've seen all the videos about people trying to use hand washing, like this, like soap dispensers. And like, if your hand is Black, the soap is not coming out. But if it's white, it's coming out. It's like, in every step of the way, as technology progresses, we're going to need people who are thinking about that. People who are going to think, okay, like this self-driving car might not recognize a Black skin as a human. How can we change that? So I would say intersectionality, get people with different views to be in the same room, to bring out some of these things, to help us keep advancing in a way that's both ethical, but also productive.
I love that answer. That was very thorough. For any of you who are listening who has a passion for social impact, or you're looking to explore a passion in this field, I feel like that was a very clear view into what the future of it looks like and what you should be thinking about as you grow in this industry or break into this industry. So once again, Mimi, thank you so much. I promise you the time was very valuable to me. I hope it was the same for you. For all my listeners, by the way, don't forget that we do have a new segment. It's called The Same 24 Hours. And we're going to be speaking with Mimi about all things productivity and wellness. And when I say wellness, specifically around physical health, mental health, and financial health. Boom. I'll see you all there in a few. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Mimi.
Thank you.